Oklahoma Territory, 1882. A white mob of 40 armed men stands in the darkness outside a farmhouse, torches flickering, ropes coiled and ready. Inside that farmhouse, a black farmer named Samuel Crawford waits to die. His crime, according to the mob, is that he dared to prosper. He bought land, raised cattle, and refused to bow to white men who believed his success was an insult to their natural order. Tonight, they plan to correct that insult with a noose. What happens in the next 90 minutes will never appear in your school textbooks. Because when the sound of hooves breaks through that darkness, everything the mob believed about power, race, and justice in the American frontier shatters completely. A single black man rides into that circle of hatred with nothing but federal warrants and an unbreakable will. And he does not come to negotiate. They could not let you know that a formerly enslaved man became the most effective lawman in American history. They could not let you know that he arrested over 3,000 criminals, most of them white, in a career spanning 3 decades. They could not let you know that when white mobs gathered to lynch black Americans, federal law had a face, and that face belonged to Bass Reeves. Let me take you back to understand how this moment became possible. The year is 1838, and Bass Reeves is born into slavery in Crawford County, Arkansas. His enslaver is a man named William Reeves, a farmer and later a politician who will eventually become a colonel in the Confederate Army. Bass spends his childhood in bondage, learning to work the land, handle horses, and survive in a world designed to crush him. But slavery cannot contain what Bass Reeves is becoming. By his teenage years, he has developed skills that his enslavers never intended him to possess. He learns to shoot with supernatural accuracy, hitting targets that seem impossible from distances that make witnesses doubt their own eyes. He learns to track animals and men across terrain that leaves others hopelessly lost. He learns to read people, to understand their fears and weaknesses, to predict what they will do before they know themselves. When the Civil War erupts in 1861, Bass Reeves sees his opportunity. The details remain disputed by historians, but what we know is this. At some point during the conflict, Bass Reeves escapes to freedom. Some accounts say he fled after a violent confrontation with his enslaver. Others suggest he slipped away during the chaos of war. What matters is that he runs north into Indian Territory, the land that will one day become Oklahoma, and there he disappears among the Creek and Seminole nations. For years, Bass Reeves lives among Native American communities, learning their languages, mastering their hunting techniques, and mapping every creek, canyon, and hiding place across hundreds of miles of frontier wilderness. He becomes fluent in multiple indigenous languages. He learns to survive in landscapes that would kill lesser men within days. And he waits. He waits for freedom to become law. He waits for a country that enslaved him to become a country where he might wield power. That moment arrives in 1875. Federal Judge Isaac C. Parker takes control of the United States District Court in Fort Smith, Arkansas. His jurisdiction covers Indian Territory, a vast expanse of lawlessness stretching across what is now eastern Oklahoma. This territory has become a haven for every criminal fleeing justice in surrounding states. Murderers, horse thieves, whiskey runners, and outlaws of every description hide in its hills and forests, knowing that few lawmen dare pursue them. Judge Parker needs deputies who can ride into this wilderness and bring criminals back for trial. He needs men who know the territory, who can track fugitives across impossible terrain, who will not be intimidated by violence or threats. Someone recommends Bass Reeves. Think about what this means for a moment. A man born into slavery, who spent his childhood as property, who escaped bondage during a war fought to keep him in chains, now stands before a federal judge and receives a badge. He receives legal authority to arrest any criminal in Indian Territory, regardless of their race. He receives the power to enforce the Constitution of the United States against anyone who breaks its laws. Bass Reeves becomes one of the first black deputy United States Marshals west of the Mississippi River. He is 38 years old, and he is about to become legendary. From the beginning, Reeves demonstrates abilities that set him apart from every other lawman on the frontier. He cannot read or write, so he memorizes his warrants. Deputies read the documents to him before he rides out, and he commits every name, every charge, every detail to memory with perfect accuracy. He never serves the wrong warrant. He never arrests the wrong man. His mind holds information that other deputies need paper to recall. But his memory is only one weapon in an arsenal that makes him virtually unstoppable. Reeves stands 6 feet 2 inches tall, weighing over 200 pounds of muscle built through decades of physical labor. He wears his Colt revolvers with the butts facing forward, a distinctive style that allows him to draw with a crossbody motion that confuses opponents expecting a standard draw. In gunfights, this split-second advantage means the difference between life and death. 14 men tried to kill Bass Reeves during his career. 14 men fail. He survives ambushes, shootouts, and assassination attempts that would have ended any other lawman. His hat and belt are shot through multiple times. Bullets tear through his clothing, graze his body, and miss his vital organs by inches. He walks away from every encounter. Now, here is where the story takes a turn that history books desperately want you to forget. Bass Reeves does not just arrest criminals. He arrests white criminals. In an era when black Americans are being murdered for looking at white women, for refusing to step off sidewalks, for the crime of existing while free, Bass Reeves rides into white communities and puts white men in handcuffs. He arrests white murderers, white horse thieves, white whiskey runners, and white terrorists. He drags them back to Fort Smith in chains and delivers them to face federal justice. How do you think white supremacists respond to this? The same men who formed the Ku Klux Klan, the same night riders who burned black homes and lynched black families, the same terrorists who believed white skin granted immunity from black authority, they watch Bass Reeves operate with growing rage. They cannot accept that a black man wields federal power over white lives. They cannot accept that the badge he carries represents something greater than their hatred. So they test him. They test him again and again. And every single time, Bass Reeves proves that federal law is stronger than mob violence. Have you ever wondered why some stories survive and others disappear? Have you ever questioned why certain heroes become legends while others are erased completely? The answer is usually power. The people who write history books have always chosen which truths to preserve and which truths to bury. Bass Reeves was too effective, too symbolic, too dangerous to white supremacist mythology. So they tried to make him vanish. Now let me bring you to that night in 1882. Indian Territory is burning with racial tension. White settlers are flooding into lands promised to Native American nations. Black communities that formed during and after the Civil War are growing, prospering, building futures that white neighbors find intolerable. Night rider groups, some wearing the hoods of the Klan and others operating without disguise, conduct campaigns of terror against anyone who threatens white dominance. They target black farmers who acquire too much land. They target black businessmen who compete too successfully. They target anyone who demonstrates that freedom actually means something. Samuel Crawford is exactly this kind of target. He arrived in Indian Territory after the war, a freed man looking for opportunity in a territory where federal law supposedly protected all citizens equally. He works for years, saves every dollar, and finally purchases his own land. He raises cattle. He builds a farmhouse. He marries and has children. He becomes living proof that black Americans can thrive when given even a small chance. And for this crime of success, a mob decides he must die. A conspiracy begins in whispered conversations at a general store owned by a man named Jacob Whitmore. Whitmore wants Crawford's land. He wants it for grazing his own cattle, and he cannot stomach the idea that a black man owns property he covets. So Whitmore spreads lies. He tells neighbors that Crawford stole cattle from white ranchers. He claims Crawford assaulted a white woman, the most explosive accusation in the arsenal of racial terror. He organizes a group of like-minded men who agree that Crawford needs to be taught a lesson, that black prosperity must be punished with rope and fire. On the night of the planned lynching, over 40 men gather at a crossroads 3 miles from Crawford's farm. They carry rifles, pistols, torches, and rope. They believe they are untouchable. Local authorities will not interfere because local authorities share their views. State authorities have no jurisdiction in Indian Territory. And federal marshals? Federal marshals are dozens of miles away in Fort Smith. By the time anyone responds, Crawford will be hanging from a tree and the mob will have scattered. This is how lynchings work. Speed, secrecy, and the assumption that no one will stop them. But someone does stop them. Because Samuel Crawford is not just a farmer. He is a citizen with connections to other black communities across the territory. When word reaches him that a mob is forming, he does not wait to become a victim. He sends a rider through the darkness toward Fort Smith, carrying a message that will change everything. Subscribe if you are enjoying this video. This history was buried for over a century, and spreading it matters more than you know. The message reaches Fort Smith in the early hours before dawn. It lands on the desk of Judge Isaac Parker, the man history calls the hanging judge for the criminals he sends to the gallows. Parker reads the report of an impending lynching with cold fury. This is not just a crime against Samuel Crawford. This is a crime against federal authority. It is a direct challenge to the court he represents, to the Constitution he has sworn to uphold, to the very idea that law means something in this territory. Parker issues warrants immediately. Conspiracy against rights, intimidation of citizens, the federal crimes that give him jurisdiction over mob violence. And he summons his most capable deputy. Bass Reeves has been tracking outlaws in Creek Nation when the summons reaches him. He has already been riding for days, sleeping in the open, eating whatever he can catch or carry. He is exhausted. But when he reads the message, when he understands what is happening, exhaustion becomes irrelevant. He turns his horse toward Crawford's farm and rides. Consider the mathematics of what Reeves is attempting. 40 armed men who believe they are beyond justice, who have gathered specifically for violence, who will view his arrival as an unacceptable intrusion. 1 deputy marshal with a badge, 2 Colt revolvers, a Winchester rifle, and federal warrants. Any rational calculation says Reeves should wait for reinforcements, should gather a posse, should approach with overwhelming force. But Reeves understands something that rational calculation misses. Every hour of delay is an hour closer to Samuel Crawford's death. And Bass Reeves has never been a man who lets calculation stop him from doing what needs to be done. He rides through the darkness with the confidence of a man who has mapped this territory in his mind over decades. He knows every trail, every shortcut, every creek crossing that will shave minutes from his journey. He pushes his horse hard, but not hard enough to break the animal before arriving. He has done this before. He has ridden into danger alone more times than he can count. He has faced men who wanted to kill him simply for being black, simply for wearing a badge, simply for representing a federal power that challenged their assumptions about how the world should work. What goes through his mind during these hours of riding? We cannot know for certain. Reeves leaves no diaries, no memoirs, no written accounts of his inner thoughts. But we know his actions, and actions reveal character more honestly than words ever could. Bass Reeves rides toward a lynch mob because he believes the law means something. He believes that the warrants in his pocket carry authority that 40 armed racists cannot override. He believes that one man with legal power is stronger than any mob operating outside it. Dawn is approaching when Reeves nears the crossroads where the mob has gathered. He has timed his arrival perfectly, not in the darkness when confusion might turn to random shooting, and not in full daylight when the mob might have already acted. He arrives in that gray space between night and morning, when torches still burn, but the eastern sky shows the first hints of color. The mob has moved to surround Crawford's farmhouse. They have been drinking through the night, building their courage, stoking their hatred. They are ready to drag Samuel Crawford from his home, to put a rope around his neck, to watch him die as entertainment for their racial grievances. Then they hear the hooves. A single rider emerges from the mist. He sits tall in the saddle, moving without hurry, approaching the mob with a calm that seems impossible given the circumstances. As he draws closer, the torchlight reveals details that stop conversations mid-sentence. His skin is black. His badge gleams silver. His hands rest easy near weapons that have killed more men than anyone in this mob wants to count. Bass Reeves has arrived. Let me pause here to ask you something. What would you do in this moment? 40 men with guns are staring at you. They have gathered to commit murder, and your arrival threatens everything they planned. They outnumber you by a ratio that makes survival seem impossible. They believe that your race makes you inferior, that your badge is an insult, that you have no right to interfere with their business. What would you do? Bass Reeves does not hesitate. He rides directly into the center of the mob, positioning his horse so that any shot at him risks hitting the men on the opposite side. It is a tactical choice, calculated in the instant, designed to make them think twice before firing. And then he speaks. His voice carries across the gathered men with an authority that has nothing to do with volume. He announces himself as a Deputy United States Marshal, operating under the jurisdiction of Judge Isaac C. Parker's court in Fort Smith. He declares that he carries federal warrants for the arrest of Jacob Whitmore and other ringleaders of this unlawful assembly. He informs every man present that participation in a conspiracy to deprive a citizen of his rights is a federal crime punishable by imprisonment, and he orders them to disperse immediately. The mob does not know how to respond. They expected no resistance. They expected to complete their lynching without consequence, to scatter before dawn, to return to their normal lives as if nothing happened. They did not expect a black lawman to ride into their midst and speak to them as if they were the criminals, because they are the criminals. And Bass Reeves is making that truth unavoidable. Jacob Whitmore pushes to the front of the crowd. He is the organizer, the instigator, the man whose greed and racism set this night in motion. He looks at Bass Reeves with undisguised contempt. He demands to know by what authority a black man dares to give orders to white citizens. He threatens Reeves with language that drips with the poison of generations of supremacist hatred. He reaches for his pistol. He never clears leather. Bass Reeves draws with that distinctive cross-body motion, and suddenly Jacob Whitmore is staring down the barrel of a Colt revolver held by the steadiest hand in the territory. Reeves tells him to remove his hand from his weapon slowly. Reeves tells him he is under arrest. Reeves tells him that the next movement toward that pistol will be his last. And everyone watching knows that Bass Reeves does not make empty threats. The moment stretches. Torches crackle. Horses shift nervously. Somewhere in the distance, a bird begins its morning song, oblivious to the human drama unfolding below. Jacob Whitmore looks into the eyes of Bass Reeves and sees something that shatters his assumptions about how this night was supposed to end. He sees a man who is not afraid. He sees a man who has survived worse odds than this and will survive these odds too. He sees a man who represents something larger than any mob, something that will outlast their hatred, something that cannot be lynched or burned or frightened away. Whitmore removes his hand from his pistol. He extends his wrists for the irons. And just like that, the mob begins to collapse. This is the moment they never wanted you to understand. This is the truth that white supremacist mythology cannot accommodate. When lawful authority confronts mob violence with unwavering determination, the mob falters. When a single man with legitimate power refuses to be intimidated, 40 men with illegitimate violence lose their nerve. The crowd that gathered to lynch Samuel Crawford watch as their leader shackled by a black marshal, and they realize that the racial order they believed was eternal has just been inverted before their eyes. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. History like this deserves to be remembered and shared. Reeves arrests 3 more ringleaders that morning, men whose names appear on his warrants, men who organized and financed this conspiracy against a black citizen's rights. He shackles them together and ties their lead rope to his saddle. He warns the remaining mob members that their names have been recorded, that further warrants may follow, that any interference with his prisoners will result in immediate federal prosecution. Then he rides toward the farmhouse where Samuel Crawford has barricaded himself and his family through the night. The door opens cautiously. Samuel Crawford sees the mob dispersing in the growing light. He sees the ringleaders shackled and defeated. He sees Bass Reeves, a black man like himself, wearing the authority of the United States government like armor. Crawford later describes this moment to federal prosecutors. He says that seeing Reeves arrive felt like watching freedom itself ride in on horseback. He says he never truly believed the government would protect black citizens until that morning. He says Bass Reeves proved that the promises of Reconstruction were not entirely empty, that somewhere in the machinery of American power there were men who would actually enforce the law regardless of race. The ride back to Fort Smith takes 3 days. Reeves and his prisoners travel through territory filled with sympathizers who might attempt a rescue. He sleeps in short shifts, never fully surrendering awareness of his surroundings. He keeps his prisoners fed and watered because federal law requires that even criminals be delivered alive for trial. He treats them with professional detachment, never rising to their insults, never responding to their racial epithets with anything but silence. He is not in the business of revenge. He is in the business of law. At Fort Smith, Judge Parker receives the prisoners with grim satisfaction. The evidence against them is overwhelming. Witnesses from the black community testify to the conspiracy, to the threats, to the planning that preceded the attempted lynching. Federal prosecutors present testimony that establishes Whitmore as the primary organizer and the other defendants as willing participants. The trial proceeds with the efficiency that characterizes Parker's court, and the verdicts come down. Jacob Whitmore receives 10 years in federal prison. His co-conspirators receive sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years. They will serve their time in federal facilities far from Indian Territory, removed from communities that might have celebrated them as heroes for their attempt at murder. Their crime is not just attempted assault. Their crime is conspiracy against the constitutional rights of an American citizen. And for once, that crime carries consequences. This is what happens when federal law actually functions. This is what happens when men like Bass Reeves enforce the Constitution without fear or favor. This is what black communities experience in the moments when the system works as it was designed to work. Lynchings fail, mobs scatter, terrorists face accountability. Justice, real justice, becomes possible. But I have to tell you what happens next, because history is not a story with a happy ending. History is a series of victories and defeats, advances and retreats, moments of hope followed by decades of betrayal. The federal support that empowered Bass Reeves does not last forever. By the 1890s, political will for protecting black citizens has evaporated. The Supreme Court guts civil rights legislation. Southern states implement Jim Crow laws that reduce black Americans to second-class citizenship. Federal marshals are no longer dispatched to prevent lynchings. The mobs return. Between 1880 and 1950, over 4,000 black Americans are lynched across the South. The system that produced Bass Reeves, that gave him badge and authority, that allowed him to confront white terror with federal power, that system is deliberately dismantled by a nation tired of enforcing equality. Bass Reeves continues serving as a deputy marshal until 1907, when Oklahoma achieves statehood and reorganizes its law enforcement. He is 69 years old when he finally surrenders his badge, still sharp, still capable, still the most successful lawman in frontier history. He has arrested over 3,000 criminals in his career. He has served more than 30 years without serious injury, despite constant danger. He has proven, again and again, that a black man can outride, outshoot, and outthink the white criminals and terrorists who believe their skin granted them immunity. He dies in 1910, largely forgotten by the nation he served. No statues are erected. No schools bear his name. No movies celebrate his achievements. The story of Bass Reeves is erased from American memory as thoroughly as the black militias of Reconstruction, as completely as every other demonstration of black effectiveness against white supremacy. Why? You already know why. The same reason they buried Captain Jim Williams. The same reason they suppressed the history of black soldiers crushing the Klan. Bass Reeves proved that when black Americans possess legal authority and the courage to use it, they can defeat racist violence. He proved that white supremacy depends on black defenselessness, that the entire structure of racial terror collapses when confronted by black power backed by law. That truth was too dangerous to remember. For a century, the frontier lawman mythology features only white heroes. Wyatt Earp, Wild Bill Hickok, Pat Garrett, these names become legend, while Bass Reeves disappears into obscurity. Movies and television shows celebrate white marshals and sheriffs, while the most effective deputy in American history remains unknown to generations of Americans. The erasure is not accidental. The erasure is the point. But history has a way of resurfacing. In recent decades, scholars have rediscovered Bass Reeves. Books have been written. Documentaries have been produced. Statues have finally been erected in Fort Smith and Muskogee. The man who rode into lynch mobs with federal warrants is slowly reclaiming his rightful place in American memory. And every time you share this story, every time you tell someone about Bass Reeves, you participate in undoing the century of erasure that white supremacy demanded. So the next time someone tells you that black Americans were passive, victims waiting for white saviors during the frontier era, remember Bass Reeves. Remember one black man riding into the darkness to confront 40 armed racists. Remember federal warrants that carried more authority than any noose. Remember the ringleaders of a lynch mob shackled and dragged to justice by the very kind of man they planned to murder that night. Remember that Bass Reeves arrested over 3,000 criminals, most of them white, without the benefit of backup, computers, forensics, or any modern law enforcement technology. Remember that he memorized every warrant because he could not read, turning disability into discipline. Remember that 14 men tried to kill him, and 14 men failed. Remember that he served for over 30 years in the most dangerous territory in America, and retired with his reputation intact. A white mob waited for a lynching. Bass Reeves arrived with federal warrants. In the violent chaos of Indian Territory, when hooded hatred gathered to defy justice, one black marshal rode in and converted mob rule into federal accountability. No rope, no torch, no advantage of numbers could stand against the badge and the unbreakable will of Bass Reeves. That is not mythology. That is history. That is what they never wanted you to know. Because knowing it means understanding that black resistance has always existed, that black excellence in law enforcement is not a modern innovation, but a tradition stretching back to the frontier itself. It means understanding that the erasure of black achievement from American memory was deliberate, calculated, and designed to maintain white supremacy by denying black communities their heroes. Bass Reeves showed us what is possible when one person refuses to accept that injustice is inevitable. He showed us that courage and competence can overcome numerical disadvantage. He showed us that the law, when enforced by someone willing to risk everything for its principles, is stronger than any mob. His story was buried for 100 years. They wanted him forgotten. They wanted you to believe that the frontier was conquered by white heroes alone, that black Americans contributed nothing to law enforcement, that racial terror went unchallenged until the modern civil rights movement. They lied. Bass Reeves rode. Bass Reeves fought. Bass Reeves won. Again and again and again. That is the history they never wanted you to know. Now you know it. And now you have a choice about what to do with that knowledge. You can let it fade from your memory like they planned, or you can share it. You can tell the story of Bass Reeves to everyone who will listen. You can become part of the recovery of a truth that white supremacy tried to bury. The man who escaped slavery became the greatest lawman of his era. The man who could not read memorized more warrants than any deputy in frontier history. The man they tried to erase is being remembered at last. Bass Reeves. Remember his name. They spent a century trying to make you forget it. Do not let them succeed. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And ask yourself this question. How many other heroes have been erased from your history books? How many other truths have been buried to maintain comfortable lies? The story of Bass Reeves is just one example of what they hid from you. There are thousands more. Start looking. Start questioning. Start demanding the history you were never taught. Because the past is not dead. The past is not even past. And the heroes they tried to erase are waiting to be remembered.